Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Excellent.
Perfect.
So this is our 13th niche conversation. I'm Jessica DeWitt. I'm one of the editors here at the network in Canadian History and Environment. And today I am joined by Ramya Swayamprakash. And do you want to tell us more about yourself?
Sure. I am a PhD candidate in history at Michigan State. I'm originally from India, and um, well, I took a long route to get here. I have a background in, I'm embarrassed to say, journalism, political science, and STS, and I have a couple of graduate degrees in two out of those three fields. And then I came to the US to do another graduate degree in urban design at Lawrence Tech in Metro Detroit. And that's where I got interested in the Detroit River. As part of a design studio, we were working on the Detroit River. The site was the Detroit River, and the idea was to sort of think about design in the terrain of water. So what would design look like if you didn't think about land and,
Mm-hmm.
or banks of rivers, but sort of designing in the river. And that's when I sort of found out more about the river. But I found this curiously shaped inverted V sort of island in the lower Detroit River that didn't look natural. And but then when I spoke with people in, downriver Amherstburg, everybody sort of said, yeah, this came about through dredging, but we don't know really how it came about. And that's how I found out that this was a completely human-made island that was built as a navigational aid. And that took me down a whole rabbit hole of master's thesis that was trying to understand infrastructure, borders, and rivers,
Mm-hmm.
and then eventually into my PhD.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one of the things about being an environmental historian is just being kind of realizing that everything that you thought was natural for so long is not in any way, or
Exactly.
it's very complicated.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I invited you here today because we're talking about your piece that you wrote for the Outside Looking In series, which is a series that Dan McFarlane and Claire Campbell put together for us about looking at historians who are writing about Canadian environmental history from outside of the country. Um, so your piece was twice removed, environmental history in the Canadian-U.S. border through an outsider's eye. And you've touched upon this a bit in your introduction, but is there anything else you want to say about how you kind of came to be um, writing from this outsider perspective, how you came to be in North America and writing about the US-Canada border?
Sure. I like I said, I sort of stumbled into the Detroit River, pun not intended. But And so when I sort of began the PhD is the first degree I'm getting in history. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have formal training as a historian. So the learning curve has been steep. And so my first year of class, I remember just feeling like in the US history survey class, I remember feeling like, why did these people accept me? I'm just a nobody. I don't know anything, right? So being an outsider sort of it's a double-edged sword, right? Like the positives for me are that I don't carry baggage that citizens and nationals often do.
Mm-hmm.
When I was growing up in India, you sort of, whether you like it or not, you're given all sorts of stuff through education, these preconceived notions about your neighbors. So a
Mm-hmm.
lot of South Asians have strong opinions about their neighbors because we've been told this through our education system, which is supposed to not indoctrinate us, but we all know the truth. So I don't have those kinds of preconceived notions about the US or Canada, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have preconceived notions about culture, places, and so I don't need to unlearn things in the way
Mm-hmm.
that, citizens and nationals often do. Um, I think there's the element that really helps me, at an immediate level is that have being somebody who's learned and written about modern Indian history, especially about sort of dams and engineers' rationales for large dams. I bring a more global and I would like to think a rounded perspective to the US-Canada border and sort of thinking about North American environmental history. And it sort of, I think, lets me see continuities and comparisons with similar impulses across the world. Because when I was studying South Asia, you end up looking at other parts of the world which were colonized. And so there are, comparisons and continuities there, which I think can sometimes carry into North America as well.
Mhm.
Uh, the con, I guess, is that the imposter syndrome never leaves. I always feel like I don't know enough, and even when I do, I'm always like, is somebody going to call me out? And then there's these, small and big things in both countries' histories that I don't fully have a grasp of. So if you ask me something about, I don't know, Alberta, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you, just like I wouldn't be able to tell you anything about Kansas. But then, like I remind myself over and over again, I don't know these things about the country of my birth either. So it's okay that I don't know everything about every place, right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes, I appear like a complete outsider because there are some cultural references that I just don't get. Um, and there are some that I refuse to get, like American football, I refuse to understand. So no matter what anyone says, I will not
Good.
understand it, right? So I refuse to understand it. So those references just are lost on me. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I feel like it's a double-edged sword, which for the most part I enjoy because it gives me a unique lens, just as a life experience, but also just, as a scholar.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I love this discussion because I too am an immigrant, although firmly rooted in North America. I'm American and I moved here 9.5 years ago for my PhD here in Saskatoon. And, if you talked to me a decade ago and told me I would be an expert in Canadian history, never part of the plan. It just kind of happened, here I am, one of the others in niche. And imposter syndrome is definitely real, like, because as an American, you don't learn anything about Canadian
Mm-hmm.
history. So, like, everything I know about Canadian history, I learned in my PhD program. And so, it's yeah, it's just like I don't understand certain things. I definitely don't know all of the history. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I just feel like I don't have a right to kind of be putting myself forward and making opinions about things.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, it's also been a very interesting exercise to learn about the US through my Canadian colleagues' eyes
Mm-hmm.
because I feel um, you really do learn something about your home country. You learn a lot of things from learning from people who aren't
Mm-hmm.
from there. So I guess that's a kind of an interesting thing to say that people are learning from me, right, and you about their home countries um, in ways that they wouldn't otherwise, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
going to pick out things that other people are not going to see,
Mm-hmm.
and that's so valuable and I think perhaps underappreciated. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't happen all that much.
Yeah.
A lot of us are studying the countries that we came from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I really love that, and I love the. I wonder, do you ever find doing like border transnational history to be challenging in some ways? Because I do it too, and sometimes I fear that I'm making things up, like the comparisons up, or I'm searching for those comparative items that will
Mm-hmm.
make something interesting. Do you ever feel
Mm-hmm.
that way?
Oh Lord,
Yeah.
yes. I just finished writing a chapter where I sort of deep dive into the International Joint Commission. So a lot of
Hmm.
the historiography on the Great Lakes has been, I think, rightfully talking about how the International Joint Commission is this body that, has worked towards cooperation, and there's a history of conflict at the US-Canada border, but, environmental regulation and things like that. And so the chapter that I just finished writing is on this desire to expand this one completely human-made channel called the Livingston Channel in the Detroit River, the lower Detroit River,
Mm-hmm.
during the Great Depression and into the New Deal. And one of the things, one of the curious things I found was that the International Joint Commission had been really interested in the possible expansion and widening of this channel in 1913 when the channel was first completed. Like they went in and they inserted themselves and sort of decided to talk to both the US and Canada about why, any expansion or deepening was needed.
Mm-hmm.
But in the late 20s and early 30s, when the International Joint Commission was well within its rights to want to do this again, they decided, no, we're not going to do it. And it was curious because the US and Canada at this time were beginning to refer to a whole bunch of things, specifically the Chicago diversion, a couple of other matters were being referred to the International Joint Commission. And the US unilaterally also sort of went ahead and told the International Joint Commission, look, we're going to do stuff upstream in the St. Clair River, upstream of the Detroit River. We're going to do some dredging. And the dredging in the Detroit River was about, in terms of scope and how much it crossed the border, etc., was similar. But then the IJC and the US and Canada decided we were just going to pretend that this was not a border thing. And the US asked Canada, and the Canadians said, yes, yes, go ahead, do it. And everybody just pretended that it wasn't a big deal. And at the end of that came this inverted, V-shaped island.
Yeah.
Which just sort of came out of nowhere and nobody seemed to care. But I mean, of course, everybody cared, but it was very curious as a moment, right? And so at that moment, I was just like, am I reading, like, am I dreaming this up? Like, did this just happen?
Yeah.
Am I
Yeah.
wrong? And so I went back and I read like books from the 1930s. The thing with the International Joint Commission is that Dan's book, the co-authored book that Dan has, is new. But before that, there aren't as many books. So I went back and I combed through stuff, and I gingerly am making a point about this uneven treatment. But every time I wrote a sentence about this, I would be like, are you cooking this up? Is somebody going to like find out?
Yeah.
So the thing with transnational history for me is that um, I wonder that I don't have enough of both sides. Um, but the conclusion that I have come to is that one, that it's an evolving thing, so there's always new stuff that I will find.
Mm-hmm.
But two, sometimes it's not enough to have both sides as much as sort of having a side, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
Yeah.
So in this case, I like went back and sort of read what the International Joint Commission had to say, even if I didn't have a full picture of what the Americans and the Canadians were saying.
Mm-hmm.
But having access to that one central body sort of gave me a perspective on what the border meant and how it made itself uh, be known, to these two countries and how they responded to the border um, vis-a-vis dredging. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an important. When I'm writing transnational history or comparative history as well, I often fear, I don't have enough of every, like, I need to have every detail of every side to make an argument. But also, like, I personally think that in environmental history and in all histories, like, comparative topics of US and Canada are very understudied. So we
Hmm.
have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah,
You can't expect one scholar to write, a definitive book that has everything in
exactly.
it, even though we kind of put that pressure on ourselves. Um, and I think there's also a problem with the Canada-U.S. border in that people ignore it. Because, for instance, like when I was still uh, planning to be on the tenure track job market, I was told that I would have trouble um, advertising myself as a borderlands historian because in job markets they would only care about the Mexico-U.S. border, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's a problem in academia that the U.S. Canada border is not taken seriously enough. So that work like yours is so important
Hmm.
in
Thank you.
making that scholarship more rich. And yeah, I'm just thank you for doing it, taking the time to
Thank you.
look at this topic. It's really good. Um, yeah, so this has been a really fun discussion.
It
I really
has.
enjoyed it. I encourage everyone to check out your piece on NiCHE. I think it was published on December 1st, but it's
Hmm.
evergreen. It's always going to be, it's going to be of interest to folks, especially those who are kind of want to have a fellow immigrant historians who want to it's always nice to read people who are in similar positions to your own. So people who are looking for that, or people who are doing the U.S. kind of border and their research will find some value in it. Yeah, so thank you for joining me today, Ramya.
Thank you so much for having me. And,
Yeah,
it's always a pleasure to do anything with me. So thank you so much for the opportunity. And
yeah.
thanks to everyone who tuned in. And, thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too. Bye.